welcome everybody, and I appreciate you all joining us. This is the December 2022 novice meeting of the Houston Astronomical Society, and we've got a wonderful program tonight on a topic that's near and dear to my heart. It is really everything about outreach, and having run the outreach group here at the Houston Astronomical Society, I can tell you that outreach is one of the most fulfilling things that I've ever done. But we're lucky tonight to be joined by a number of folks who are well-versed and experienced in outreach themselves. So without further ado, what I'll do is pass the mic over to Debbie Moran, and she'll get us started here.
So hi, everyone. I'm Debbie Moran, and I'm the novice chair. This is my last time for either, I think it's 9 or 10 years I've been doing this. And I also have found that after doing a lot of my own astronomy, I started gravitating toward almost exclusively outreach in recent years, just because I love it so much. And so I decided to gather together heads of the various clubs who have been running outreach in these areas or done an enormous amount of outreach. And so tonight we have really several people in the Houston Astronomical Society who have headed outreach. Joe Califf, our current president, was also a previous outreach chair. And then we'll have, hopefully, if he comes on, our future outreach chair, or our current one, Dan Roy. And I will speak somewhere in the middle of this. I've also invited Bruce Pollard, who's with North Houston Astronomy Club. They actually have a freestanding observatory where they do outreach with the public. David Haviland is here, and he's done so much. He's going to cover the activities of Fort Bend Astronomy Club, Johnson Space Center Astronomy Club, and also the George Observatory and Astronomy Day. So I think and Amelia and Steve Goldberg are here, and they're members of multiple clubs and have always done a lot of outreach. And since both of them became retired, it's on overdrive. And Amelia has the best idea I've ever seen in outreach, so she will cover that pretty soon. So without further ado, at this point, I'm going to hand this over to Joe Califf, our first speaker. And Joe, you're muted.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right, sorry about that. You'd think after so many months of using Zoom, I'd know better, but appreciate that intro, Debbie. Thank you. As I mentioned earlier, I ran the outreach group for the Houston Astronomical Society for 4 years, and I will say that it was probably the most fulfilling volunteer opportunity that I had with the Houston Astronomical Society. It's something that I look back fondly on, and I still participate in outreach events when we have the opportunity. There are a number of things that I get out of it as a personal benefit, but we'll have an opportunity to talk about that tonight. If you look at the mission statement of the Houston Astronomical Society, it is to foster the science and art of astronomy through programs that serve our membership and the community. And that last piece there really, to me, is all about the outreach efforts, education and outreach efforts that we do as a club. Now, obviously, COVID has affected the way that we do outreach. Prior to COVID, we did roughly, on average, 1 outreach event per week, anywhere from 50 to 60 outreach events per year. But we're hoping that as things start to normalize, we'll get back to a sense of or some sort of routine with those outreach efforts. Now, I remember the first time I did an outreach event. It's kind of interesting. I went from never having done one to outreach chairperson in a couple of years. And the reason I did it is Debbie Moran, who was the outreach chairperson at the time, reached out and said, hey, we're doing an outreach event for a troop of Girl Scouts on the northeast side of Houston. Would anybody like to join? And I'd been a club member for a number of years at this point, but really hadn't been super active. I just figured, you know what? I had not taken my telescope out in some time. I think this would be good. And so I volunteered to help out. And I'll be honest with you, as the day drew nearer, I was getting nervous. And I just kept thinking, oh my gosh, I'm going to show up and get completely embarrassed by this group of Girl Scouts and whatnot. What am I going to do? I don't know what I'm doing. But thankfully, Debbie was able to kind of just walk me through what an outreach event was like, what we needed to do, and how we could provide, a tremendous amount of value and entertainment and other things to the people that we were spending the night there observing with. So I thank Debbie for helping me get started on that outreach journey. And, I just hope that we can help more people along that line. So, there are a couple of things that when people say, hey, look, I want to get involved in outreach, what do I need to do? Well, the first thing to do is just show up, right? You don't need a fancy telescope or anything else like that. Just, coming there by yourself or maybe with somebody else, you'll meet up with other members of your respective clubs, whether it's the Houston Astronomical Society, Fort Bend, North Houston, Johnson Space Center, any of the local clubs that you're doing these outreach events with. You will get a lot of help from the folks who are doing these outreach events, and they'll be able to kind of usher you along and show you what it is you need to do. The other thing I mentioned to people is, contrary to popular belief, you don't need a telescope to do outreach. There have been times when we've done outreach events and we've had upwards of 1,000 or more people at these outreach events. Any little help we can get for crowd control or just engaging with other people, that's certainly beneficial, and we can certainly use that. Now, not all outreach events are the same. In my mind, at least, outreach events generally fall into two categories. The first one is star parties, and those are the traditional ones that we think of when we're out under the stars with our telescopes and observing and doing those things. But we also get a lot of requests for talks and presentations, and many of these happen during the day. We'll get talk requests from elementary schools, preschools, senior citizens facilities, churches, things like that. And so, for many people, the first time that they get started in an outreach event, it's usually at the star parties. I think it's easier to get started there than to jump up in front of a group of people and provide a presentation. But this is, in my mind, at least generally, the two buckets that these things fall into. Now, sometimes some of these events that we do participate in have both. So some people within the organization may be doing a talk or a presentation, and others will be doing the telescope portion of it. This is something specifically for the HAS folks, and I get this question a lot. Can I bring a loaner telescope from the HAS inventory for an outreach event? The answer is absolutely yes. We want you to use those telescopes in as many ways as possible, and we certainly encourage you to bring those telescopes out to an outreach event when we have those. What has happened in many cases in the past is people will show up to these outreach events to volunteer, and they'll say, hey, I didn't bring a telescope. They'll start asking me questions about my telescope. I'm like, hey, why don't you take the reins? Why don't you show people things through my telescope? I'm more than happy to kind of hand the keys to the car over to you and let you do that. And I've had a number of people do that. And it's a nice way to get involved, kind of get your feet wet with outreach. And you'll find that many members within the Houston Astronomical Society, I'm sure it's like this with other clubs, are more than happy to let you commandeer their telescopes as well and interact and engage with the public there. This was, when I talked about the Girl Scout event, this is where I got a little bit nervous, right? A lot of times we think, hey, you know what, I'm not really the expert on, this type of astronomy, or I'm just getting started. I'm really a novice. You don't have to be an expert in order to be really successful and effective in outreach. Most people who are there are just super excited to have the opportunity to look through a telescope. There have been so many folks that I've talked to, even in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, who will tell me, I've never even looked through a telescope. So just the fact that you're out there giving them an opportunity to, look at things through the telescope, to talk about things that are astronomy related, that's more than enough. And quite honestly, I will point my telescope to an object in the sky. I'll look something up on my phone, Google whatever it is that I need to, and just share a few facts. And that just fascinates people. So while I say you don't have to be an expert, just learn a thing or two on the fly with your smartphones about what it is that you're looking at. Share that with people. They'll typically be fascinated by what it is that you're sharing with them. And then lastly, I know some people who do outreach. They'll bring their most expensive eyepieces, these televiews, and $700 eyepieces and things like that. I tell people all the time, you don't have to use your nicest equipment for outreach. But I do recommend that you don't use kind of bottom of the barrel, cheapest equipment, especially with the eyepieces and telescopes, because if it's frustrating for you to use, it could be very frustrating for somebody who's never used that equipment and isn't able to actually take a look through it and see what it is that that you're trying to share with them. So try to find something that's a decent piece of equipment, something that's not too expensive. You won't be too upset if it gets smudged, somebody accidentally touches the lenses and things like that, and that'll make you pretty happy with what you're doing there. And then I think I said lastly for the last one, this is the last thing I'll finish with. And this to me is the most important. I think in many cases, people get to the eyepiece, they're waiting in lines to look through the telescopes. They'll get to the eyepiece, and I think they feel very rushed to just look and then move on, right? Some people will spend 5 to 10 minutes in line just to take a look at whatever it is that you're looking at through the telescope. I encourage people all the time to spend as much time as they need to properly look and observe at what it is that we're looking at through the eyepiece. And I think it's a huge disservice if we're just trying to rush people in and out of out of line. If we don't give them an opportunity to really kind of take in and appreciate what it is that we're looking at. So I think that when you're getting started in outreach, sometimes you can be a little intimidated by the lines that can queue up at your telescope. But rest assured, the night is long, and you have plenty of opportunity to get people through. Just give people an opportunity to look. And one of the things that I've done when I see somebody, kind of pop into the eyepiece real quick and walk away, I'll stop them and I'll ask them, well, what did you see? Were there any colors that kind of popped out at you, right? What I want to do is encourage them to come back and take another look through the eyepiece and really have an opportunity to observe, right? Not necessarily feel rushed to get in and out, because maybe they're looking at the queue and saying, I need to make this quick. I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to see what it is that we're looking at and doesn't feel rushed to leave the telescope. So one of the things that you'll find out when you're doing outreach is that you're going to be dealing with lots of kids. Many of the events we do, parents will reach out to me often and say, hey, I've got a kid who's interested in outreach, or in astronomy. When is the next time you guys are going to have telescopes out somewhere? And many parents do these things or come out specifically for their kids. And so there are a couple of things that I wanted to share with you when it comes to dealing with kids. First and foremost, you'll see the picture on the left there with Amelia and her telescope. If you have a telescope like a Dobsonian that requires kids to maybe come up a little bit, step on a ladder or something like that in order to see through the eyepiece, having a step stool or a step ladder like Amelia has there, like a two-step ladder with a handle, is of utmost importance and criticality. So it's really important that they have a stable platform they can walk up, get an opportunity to look through the eyepiece. And if you'll notice that young man's hands, what he's doing is stabilizing himself there at the handle of that ladder and not leaning up against the telescope. That to me is one of the most important things you can encourage the kids to do is first step up on the ladder, get to a comfortable position, hold on tightly, and then they can kind of move in to look through the eyepiece themselves. The other thing that you'll see on the right in that picture that I have there, my telescope is a Schmidt-Cassegrain design, so a little different than what Amelia has there. And what I do is, even if it's a mixed crowd, you can see that there are kids, there are plenty of adults in that crowd as well. I tend to put my tripod down to the lowest level I possibly can, and I want to accommodate the children first. It's a lot easier for an adult to kind of bend over most of the time and then take a look through the eyepiece than it is for an adult to pick up their kid and try to hold them over the eyepiece, or for a kid to be on their tiptoes and whatnot. And so for me, if it's a Schmidt-Cassegrain type of telescope that you're going to be bringing out, please consider lowering that telescope down as far as it's practicable, so that you can make sure that it's easy for the kids to take a look through those telescopes. The other thing I wanted to mention is that for many kids, looking through an eyepiece is not the most natural activity, right? And this is a picture of my daughter when we were doing some solar observing. You can see the sun was pretty far down on the horizon there. But you could see how she's holding her eyes. For many kids, they have difficulty actually closing one of their eyes to observe, right? And so what we do is we tell kids, and we encourage them to peer down through the eyepiece itself as if you're looking through a toilet paper roll or something like that. And for some kids, especially if they're younger, it may be difficult because their faces are much smaller, and so there may be some interference by their nose or something like that. If you're seeing that they're struggling trying to get to the eyepiece, you can encourage them to turn their head a little bit more and then just to kind of peer out of the side of their face to look through that. That way there's no interference with their nose. But the other thing too is if they're having a problem kind of getting that alignment, seeing what it is they need to see. If you take a look carefully, you'll often see that the other eye may be open. And if you can encourage them to close their eye and, with their hand, actually cover their eye with their hand, that may help them in that endeavor. Now, if they're on a ladder and they're doing that, that obviously takes one of their hands off. So you may want to encourage their parents to help stabilize them when they're up there at the telescope. Now, one of the things that, or a couple of things that are highly encouraged, I would say, if you're going to get into outreach, are to have a couple of items. The first there on the left is just a red flashlight. Now, many times we do these events, especially here in Houston, where a red light just doesn't make any difference, right? There's so much, light pollution and whatnot that, the red light doesn't help to preserve anything. But I think what it does is it helps encourage the public to become aware of what it is we do with red lights and why we use red lights. And the other thing is it's an opportunity, I think, at least, to talk about light pollution and the importance of night vision preservation and things like that. And so I know that's something near and dear to Debbie's heart, and she'll be talking about that in just a bit. But even though there's plenty of light pollution, having a red flashlight and showing what we use it for, I think is really good. And again, it gets people thinking more about potentially the light pollution that we're dealing with. The other thing on the right-hand side is you'll see this green laser. Green lasers are absolutely fantastic tools to use for outreach events because, as you can see there, the beams are quite visible in dark skies. And it's easy for us to point to objects as opposed to using our fingers to try to get people to see a star or a region in the sky. You can find a lot of these green lasers on eBay now for about $5 to $10. And they're absolutely wonderful objects to have when you're explaining things to people, giving night sky tours and whatnot. The thing that I would highly encourage you to do is resist any urges or attempts by children to commandeer those green lights. Many times these kids are very fascinated by the green lasers. They'll ask if they can use them, and I have to politely decline because a couple of things. One, if they accidentally flash that green laser in somebody's eye, that can create or cause some damage in the eye. The other thing too is if they flash that laser at an airplane, that is a federal offense, and that can come with hefty fines, potentially jail time, things like that. And so it's best to make sure that you're in control and command of your green laser at all time. But like I said, if you're going to do outreach, I would highly recommend, certainly having the red light, which most amateur astronomers have. But if you want to go ahead and plop down the $5 or $10 for a green laser, a worthy investment for those outreach events. So, when people come out for the first time and they're looking at or they're wanting to participate in outreach events, many times they'll say, hey, what can we look at, right? Do I have to point it at some, 12th magnitude galaxy or 13th magnitude galaxy or anything like that? The answer is no, right? The bigger, brighter the object, the better, especially when you're in the Houston Light Dome. Being able to look at objects that what I call the wow factor are things that you're typically chasing. Right now is a great time to do outreach because we have Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars up in the night sky. Jupiter and Saturn are fantastic outreach events. Mars, not so much. People get a little frustrated with Mars. It is a small object and can be frustrating to look at. So if you happen to be in that time of year when Jupiter and Saturn are up, that's a great time. The moon is a great object to look at as well, especially the first quarter moon. There's a lot of light and shadow play going on the moon at that time. And people love to take a look at the detail of the different surface features on the moon. Bright Messier objects are things that we take a look at quite often. There are fewer and fewer Messier objects that we can see within the city of Houston, unfortunately, but there are things that, if you've got an 8-inch or larger telescope that you're using, you can tease out of the light polluted skies. Globular and open clusters are generally easier to find. I put M13, the Pleiades, open clusters like that will do well. Some planetary nebula do okay. Within the city of Houston, we've been able to find M57, the Ring Nebula. But you may as well just give up on any chance of looking at galaxies, even the most close by and bright galaxies like the Andromeda Galaxy just don't do well in those telescopes within the city limits here. So I would try to avoid those. Other clustered asterisms tend to be really popular with folks who come out to do these outreach events with us. So NGC 457 is also known as the Owl Nebula. It's an open cluster of stars that actually looks like an owl or ET or Wally. And when you explain that to people, you'll normally get an excited, oh yeah, I see that, right? Those are fun things to look at. The coat hanger is another asterism, the Stargate. And then barring any other, let's say it's a night where we can't really find too many things. If you can find certain double stars like Alberio with the contrast in color between kind of that goldish yellow and blue, that's a big hit. A lot of people love those. And then if you can find older stars or stars that are kind of at the end of their lives, the red giants or maybe even some carbon stars like Heinz Crimson Star, things like that. Those are really fun to look at as well. But what I found that is, regardless of what you're looking at, if you can kind of share an anecdote or two about that object, there are times when we've looked at just stars. Here's Vega, it's 25 light years away. So the light that you're seeing from this object left 25 years ago. And when people start to ponder that, it's just absolutely amazing and makes that time there at the eyepiece and engaging with you that much better. So I'll kind of wrap up with this. I've got one slide after this, but this is kind of the thing I'll kind of finish up on. A couple of years ago when I was doing outreach, I compiled a list of 7 reasons to do outreach, and many of these we've kind of talked about already. But what I found is that as a father with full-time job and several other duties, many times it's difficult for me to get to our dark side or other dark sites to do observing. Outreach was my excuse to get out and actually do some observing. So if you're looking to get some time with your telescope and have an opportunity to get out and look at things, outreach is a wonderful excuse to do that. The second thing is outreach will make you a better astronomer. So the more that you're doing outreach, even if you're looking at objects that you've looked at hundreds of times before, the more you look at these things, the more that you'll find out about it. And the more you engage with other members, the more you'll learn about those objects. And so I've found for me that nothing has helped me progress as an astronomer than doing outreach. I kind of mentioned this before, you'll get to learn from others. The first several times I showed up to an outreach event, I would ask, Stephen, Amelia Goldberg and others, hey, what should I point my telescope at? And they would give me some ideas. I'm like, oh, okay, what is that? And they would go through and explain to me what it is that we're looking at. So I got an opportunity to learn from others while I did outreach, and I still get that opportunity every time that I go out and do that. The fourth thing is, when you're doing outreach, you can actually spend that time working on your Astronomical League observing challenges. So if you're working on, say, the lunar program or the Messier program, whatnot, I will admit this, I've used that opportunity to find objects that I need to log for certain Astronomical League observing challenges, and then share the views with others, obviously. Then I'll come home and log those events and use that for my progression. Speaking of Astronomical League awards, there is an outreach award that's provided by the Astronomical League. So you do a certain number of events. I believe there are 3 levels. You can actually submit your outreach efforts and logs to the Astronomical League and actually get pins and certificates for those efforts. So I'll encourage you doing that. Number 6, if you are looking to potentially buy a new telescope or eyepiece, I found that chances are somebody who you're doing outreach with has one of those pieces of equipment. And I've unashamedly gone out and said, hey, I noticed you're using this particular eyepiece. What do you think about it? We'll talk about what that equipment is, and I'll have an opportunity to test drive it while we're waiting for folks, or once we're trying to break down and we've got a little time in the evening. But you'll find that you're working with a lot of people that have equipment that you don't have. And outreach is a wonderful time to ask people about those pieces of equipment and try them out so that you make sure this is something that you want before you actually buy it. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, you will get a tremendous amount back when you're doing outreach for the time that you're sharing with others. The hope is anytime you're doing outreach, for me at least, right? My hope is that I'm hopefully inspiring the next Carl Sagan or somebody like that to want to get into astronomy or other STEM fields. And so for me, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing the look on a kid's face or hearing them say, wow, the first time they take a look and see the rings of Saturn, for example. So whatever effort you're putting into it from a time and energy perspective, I guarantee you're going to get a multifold return on that investment on your part. So here are just a few examples of notes that I've received over the years from the events that I've done. Like I said, there's nothing more satisfying than seeing letters like this coming from groups of kids that you've done events with, or other folks that you've done these things with. So with that, I'd like to wrap up, and I'll pass it back to you, Debbie.
Hey, thanks for my first introduction. Let's see. Okay, yes. Okay, I have a wonderful picture. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Should be in here. Maybe I can't. Looking for my pictures, which are open. Well, never mind. I can't find my pictures. I have if I find it later, I will show it. But I have a fantastic, let me stop sharing, or I never started. I have a fantastic picture of Steve and Amelia at one of the outreaches they're going to show. So I'm going to introduce now Steve and Amelia Goldberg. We've had hundreds and thousands of people in astronomy doing outreach, but I believe Amelia is the only person who thought to paint a telescope pink. And I know why, because when I first joined the Houston Astronomical Society in 1980, I was dismayed at how few women are interested in astronomy and joining clubs. And I don't understand it, because there's nothing more aesthetic as a science than astronomy. So I want to thank Amelia for letting the girls know that there are women out there who are very interested in this, and her pink telescope is a big draw. So Steve and Amelia, I'll invite you to come on and share your screen.
We're already there.
Oh, thank you, Debbie.
Can y'all see it?
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we do. We see it. Thanks.
Well, Steve and I have been doing outreach for almost 40 years now, and we enjoy it tremendously. Back in December of 2014, I was using a little first scope to do outreach, and it's just too small. So I told Steve I wanted to get a 6-inch or an 8-inch telescope to do outreach. Well, about 2 weeks later, I was out of town, and he got a call from a guy who had an 8-inch telescope that he wanted to get rid of. He was moving and didn't want to move the telescope. So Steve went and picked it up for me. I'll put it in here.
Yeah.
You sure? There, this is the telescope. So I decided that I was going to convert this telescope into something that would attract little girls, just to encourage little girls in science, whether it be astronomy or any other. And so I got this telescope, decided to paint it pink. I went to Hobby Lobby and I found these nice looking A's that I thought would look great on the rocker box. And then I've got some black crystals that I made this artificial star field, and these crystals sparkle in the light. I wanted to name the scope after one of the goddesses in Greek mythology, so I went out on the internet and looking for a name. And I really had a problem trying to find something that I felt was suitable. And one day my daughter called me and she says, go look up Astrea. So I did, and I found out that Astrea was also called the Star Maiden. So, oh, wow, perfect. She was one of the goddesses who lived on Earth with mankind, and when she decided to go back to Mount Olympus, Zeus put her up in the sky as the constellation Virgo. So I said, okay, well, let me put the constellation Virgo on my telescope. You might be able to see it right there. Excuse me. I started to keep, did I do that one? I started to keep a journal. Every time I take the scope out, Steve will use a counter to keep track of how many people look through the telescope. He takes pictures, and after we get back, I'll write up a little article for my journal, certain details like how many people, what we did, what we showed everybody, add some pictures in there. And I'll go back every once in a while and look through this journal, and it certainly brings back a lot of memories. Then a friend of mine got this pink wagon for me to haul the scope to and from the car when we do these outreaches. We go where the people are. We do outreaches everywhere. We go to schools, we go to libraries, we do scout groups, we do church groups. Steve and I will set up this telescope in our driveway every Halloween if the sky is clear. And it's a lot of fun. These kids here are an example. Those kids were really into the telescope, just totally interested in looking at themselves in the mirror and looking through the eyepiece and seeing their eyeball. We do astronomy in the park downtown. And when they have a special event down there, it really draws the people. It's not unusual to have 400 to 600 people come look through your telescope in one evening. That's really awesome. We do a lot of outreach at schools. And these kids, these young kids, they are priceless. It's just amazing to see the smile on their face when they see the moon in the telescope for the first time. They just grin from ear to ear. And look at that little boy's face. He had just seen Jupiter for the first time in a telescope. He was so excited, he almost couldn't contain himself. Look at his face. It tells the whole story. It makes it worthwhile. When it's cloudy outside and we have a school event to do, we'll take the telescopes inside. And here we have a long hallway. And this arrow here is pointing to a model of Saturn that I made so that we can hang these up from the ceiling and at least have something that the kids can look at through the telescopes. School science nights, they're the most fun. Those are usually well attended, and you've got curious kids who ask tons and tons of questions. It's a really fun thing to do. So like Joe said, why do outreach? Well, it's not hard. It's actually pretty easy. You don't have to have a telescope, as he said. We always need help with crowd control. You get more enjoyment out of it than the work that you put into it. And it really gets to you. You get hooked. I think it's one of the most enjoyable aspects of astronomy, sharing what you love with the public, especially the little kids. It's something that I missed most during COVID, and I'm really glad that we're starting to get back into it. It's one of the best things that you can do. And that's all for me.
Thanks so much, Steve and Amelia. And Amelia for your presentation. Thank you so much. And Steve for being back there. I know he helps a lot too. So I'd like to call on David Haviland, who is a leader at the Fort Bend Astronomy Club. And he's going to cover several topics, the Museums of Natural Sciences George Observatory, where Fort Bend Astronomy Club does a lot of its observing. He's also chaired Astronomy Day for many years, which is an annual event out of George Observatory, and it's probably the largest outreach event we do in Houston. And he's also a member of the Johnson Space Center Astronomy Club. So he'll cover a few activities. David, are you there? I hope. And if he's not there, if he ran off, I could call on Bruce Pollard.
He might
David,
be still on mute.
are you there?
So David might still be on mute.
And his camera is off. But let me try. Why don't we try ask him to unmute? And if he's not there, we'll move on to Bruce.
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I can do a little thing, and somebody can try and do.
Sure. Why don't we go to Bruce Pollard? So Bruce, and then hopefully David will come back. Bruce is a member of the North Houston Astronomy Club, and they have actually an observatory building where they do outreach, and they have public nights. And he's going to tell us a little bit about North Houston Astronomy Club's activities.
Sure, and I will say that the observatory is actually a separate functional item. It doesn't belong to the club. It's part of the it's part of the Humble Area School System Foundation. And so I'll talk about that a little bit separately. So we have a child of HAS, which was formed to go along with the Lone Star Community College that's up here. And as we've since grown a little bit away from it, but the charter is very similar to the HAS one. And we have a website, which is there, and we have meetings every fourth Friday of the month. And we have a dark site, which is kind of by Dobbin. So it's sort of west and northish of town. A little different from Columbus. We don't have as much stuff. Ours is a field. We've got a container out there, and we've got some loaner scopes, but it's plenty dark. Then in addition to our meetings, which are now virtual, and we've got a place that we have the meetings, a lovely meeting place at a firehouse, which is kind of at the corner of Highway 45 and 1960. Which is north in our area. In addition to that, we have an outreach effort, which is a huge part of what we do. We have some relationships that are formed with the local governing areas. There's a precinct 3 that has a park system, and we meet every month at Punt Park. And sometimes it's twice a month, and we set up and we get 2 or 3 scopes, and we look at all different sorts of things in the same way that Joe talked about. We also have Jesse Jones Park, which has not been quite as regular, but it used to be every month. We had a couple of people assigned to take care of that, and then other people would come kind of as they needed to. The other thing that we do is in Atascocita, kind of in the middle of the Atascocita area, there's a grocery Walmart, and they have a kind of a big hill, grassy hill in back behind the Walmart. And they'll set up a grill, and they'll grill some hot dogs, and Culver's will give us some custard. And we'll put a few scopes up on the berm as it gets dark and invite people in and get them interested. We have both Girl Scout and Boy Scout camps north of us, and a lot of Cubs and Packs and Girl Scout troops that invite us to come give talks to the Scout meetings, as well as we come out and we help out with some things at the Scout camp. The other thing is, as was mentioned, is school science nights, and providing people for the science fair that come that are a little bit more science oriented sometimes than some of the other judges, and they know some things that, so they can, if things have to be talked about a little bit, we can talk about those things. So that's North Houston Astronomy Club. It's a great organization. Turns out I'm president. I've been president for a couple of years. We trade off doing that in the different jobs. We have about 40 people, and we advertise so everybody can certainly join in our Zooms or come to our meetings. So I'm going to switch gears now. So outside of Jack Fields Elementary School, which is off of just off of Rankin Road and just south of the community center, Aaron, and I need to sing Aaron's praises 100 times. He's the lead. He's was on the school board. He learned the ropes. He talked with people, and he talked with admin-staff, which eventually became Insperity. And they had a program where people gave donations, and then Insperity matched it. So they built us. They built for the foundation of an observatory, and I'll show you a bit what's inside in a little bit. It's a great thing. So there's a separate website for that. You can just type Insperity Observatory and you'll find it. And it's on Houston Avenue. And so you've probably never come to a public night, because our public night, I think, is on the same night as your regular meeting night. We've been around for 22 years now. We have a lot of different things going on. It's really there to educate students and families about the science, and to be a center for if something happens, like an eclipse or all the different solar things that might happen. We always have somebody there. And sometimes it's handy to look with a telescope, or sometimes we just go outside and point our binoculars. And the school system has never given us any money. We've gotten money donated from Insperity and money from lots of people. And we have a wall in the observatory that has all the different stars and constellations, and you can buy a constellation or a star, and they'll put your name next to it. They won't rename the star or the constellation, but you can buy pretty much any Messier that you want. And it's a tool for schools and classes all around. They can make reservations and they can come. And we have a team of people that have trained with Aaron, and we can meet, and we schedule other meetings, and some people will pay a little money. Like if you have 25 people, you can pay $50 and we'll give you an evening at the observatory. Here's the inside. We have 3 telescopes. We have a 6.5 or 7-inch Takahashi refractor. We have a 16-inch Meade, and we have a 21-inch Ritchie Crichton. So we have a good variety that with the different eyepieces, and people can, we've got chairs and they can file through and they can see things. We set up during the, it's a retractable roof. We set up during the, during COVID to do electronically assisted, and we just shot stuff and projected it on the outside, and people sat in chairs. So it's an excellent opportunity. We have some students come in and they do science projects. The Lone Star Community College Honors Program students come in. You know, I do spectroscopy, so I've worked spectroscopy experiments with them, looking at stars and grading stars. And the astronomy students from the high schools will come and they'll actually not just look at stuff, but they'll bring a worksheet that's an experiment that is looking at stars or judging distances and that sort of thing. So it's good. And these are good mounts, and they're peer mounted, so we can walk in and flip on one of those things and have it running in no time at all. So it works out pretty well. So that's my short introduction. The experience that everybody's talking about is it's so much better telling about people about what you're seeing and talking about them, helping them see what they've seen than it is just sitting out there in the middle of the dark by yourself sometimes. So I'll hand it back to Deborah.
Thanks so much, Bruce. Really appreciate your being here.
Oh, no problem.
And David, I'd like to introduce David Haviland, who's been a big leader in the Fort Bend Astronomy Club. Fort Bend Astronomy Club is probably the king of outreach in the Houston area. They are extremely prolific. They've made outreach a real priority. I'm going to ask him, one of my questions for David is this part of that success, that you do a limited geographic area where most of your members are located. And I'm hoping that might be related to whether we could increase the number of people willing to do outreach. Maybe Dan Roy could take a look at this as outreach chair. If we can pair people closer to opportunities, many of these come during rush hour for us, a lot of these school science nights. So David's also involved with the Johnson Space Center Astronomy Club, the George Observatory, which is owned by the Museum of Natural Science, and he's been frequently the head of Astronomy Day, which is probably Houston's largest single outreach event, and it's an annual event. So David, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
All right, you got me? Yeah.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, so I apologize for that. Before, when I first opened PowerPoint, my Zoom window was under the PowerPoint, so thanks for Bruce to pinch hit real quick there. So I'm going to chat a little bit about the George F. Beck and JSC.
There's an ambulance is driving down the street. Then that Doppler shift happens.
Okay. The George Observatory, as many of you know, is down off of 59 and 288 up here at Bravo. Somebody's in the background.
And if there's nothing special about where we are in the universe.
And there at the George Observatory, they have the East Dome, the Research Dome, the West Dome, and this very, very large deck. As Debbie said, we do Astronomy Day, and we also do, it's open every Saturday night. FBAC is mainly responsible for the East Dome, but volunteers are more than welcome to come to the Research Dome, West Dome, as well as the deck. At the George, in the East Dome, and I'll talk about this a little bit more when I get to about FBAC, they've got an 18-inch reflector, which we're planning on upgrading. There's the 36 Ritchie in the Research Dome and a 14-inch SCT in the West Dome. We actually want to see, and I say we as if I'm speaking for the George, like to see more buy-in from HAS members. Right now, FBAC is driving the East Dome, which of course they're contractually obligated to do, but FBAC members are mainly staffing the Research Dome and West Dome at that point too. And you're more than welcome to. I mean, the George basically benefits FBAC and HAS the most. So we encourage people to come down. Dome and deck operations, it reopened in March of 2021 under fairly strict guidelines. The HMNS decided it wanted to play by different rules pre and post pandemic. All three domes started with electronic assisted astronomy, which I know some of you are familiar with. I'll chat a little bit about that, but not all. But the decision was made to use the ZWO 294 in all three domes so that anyone trained in one dome could go help with EAA in the other domes as well. So we can find an interesting challenge. We not only have to teach the scope operations, but as long as people are willing, we also have to be able to teach them the EAA side of it. And that has actually been a training challenge. We have had people learn the scope that have no interest in learning the EAA and say, call me when we're back to visual. So we've had that, we've done that. This was a terrible picture of M31 that I took a few weekends ago using SharpCap. I think this is familiar to most of you that know about EAA. I've grabbed this one of 51 and 57. And then if it's me, I'll always grab a picture of the moon. Jeff Lepp grabbed this picture of Running Man in the East Dome. Now, EAA is probably going to be here to stay because it allows seeing in detail that otherwise would not be seen visually. So while we emerge from the pandemic and we start going more visual, EAA is not going away anytime soon. While the deck scopes now have the choice of either visual or EAA, and I should add, FBAC and JSCAS outreach, some people are starting to bring EAA to those outreach events too. Welcome, as welcome as that is. The Research Dome has gone visual while the East Dome and West Dome are still doing EAA to show things like this to the public and say, okay, somebody's going to have this object in a telescope, go look at it there, go come look at it here on the screen, and you'll see the differences. Now, as Debbie mentioned, the George also helps host the Houston Astronomy Day. Yes, these are pre-pandemic pictures. We did run an A-Day 2022 and a very limited restart. Leonard Ferguson, myself, Kavita Self, and Tracy. We ran it with about 325 people with a top limit of 500 in attendance, and we were literally competing with the World Series and Wings Over Houston. So that's probably where we lost some attendance, lost a little bit of that. We're going to fly it again in 2023 and see how it works there. There have been changes at the George, major changes since the pandemic. All volunteers are welcome, but they have to sign up ahead of time and be in contact with Tracy Ganas or Hannah Lang. Sign up is only done through a Sign Up Genius. Paperwork has to be filled, and all volunteers have to clear a Social Security-based background check. This is HMNS rules, not the George and not the clubs. So it's if somebody just blindly shows up, unfortunately, they're turned away. Right now, we're up to about 45 active volunteers. Once completed, you're welcome to come out, run a deck scope, or volunteer in the domes.
Is empirical.
Hey, David, do you have a background thing running?
No, I don't. This is coming from somebody else.
Yeah, I'm going to try to. Yeah, Bruce, your mute is going in and out, Bruce Pollard. Thank you.
Okay. Major changes since the pandemic is they managed to make the volunteers actually ask for some changes. To be honest, the topic I will bring up later is some of us are starting to face burnout at the George, and this is something that outreach people need to consider. No free-for-all in tickets, no more 350 tickets in one night. Tickets are limited to 75 an hour with 2 or 3 sessions per night, depending on this time of year. Right now, as of today, as of the flip off of daylight savings time, we're running a 7 to 8, 8 to 9, and 9 to 10 shift. And golly gee whiz, we're actually on our way home by 10:15, rather than 1:30 in the morning when we had the 350 plus. So this has been a welcome change by the volunteers. The time is a bit more reasonable. No crowd issues, no wrapping around the dome. Everybody gets to look. You don't have irritated patrons who don't have enough time to look, as what Joe was mentioning earlier. And again, this helps prevent a little bit of volunteer burnout. But folks do have to plan ahead. Tickets are often sold 3 weeks in advance. So that's pretty much there for the George. Now, since I had the East Dome in there, I'm going to wrap that around and slide over to FBAC. We've got national recognition by the Night Sky Network, and it's kind of funny because in our respective prime, FBAC was slugging it out with a #1 position with the Riverside Astronomical Society in Riverside, California, oddly where I went to graduate school. Fort Bend astronomy is largely based around the Missouri City, Stafford area. It has strong support for Fort Bend ISD STEM. Fort Bend is a very large school district, so these schools talk to each other. So the middle schools talk to the elementary schools, word of mouth gets around, and the AOW program through the years has become one of its greatest strengths, and it's been going on for 35 years. AOW program will host anywhere from 18 to 40 plus events in a given calendar year. Attendees have ranged anywhere from 50 to 1,000, depending on students, teachers, families, and attendees. These events, I will talk about this in a bit about club demographics. These events will easily draw 8 to 14 scopes, 2 pairs of binoculars, and up to 3 to 4 indoor presentations, and have anywhere from 20 to 30 plus participants staffing the event. It has been restarted this fall after the pandemic. And there may be 15 events so far that have actually either transpired or planned through the beginning of November of 2023. There have been so far a few recent weeks in November where we've had 2 events in the same week. So things are kind of starting to ramp up once schools are coming out from under the restrictions of the pandemic. Also, Fort Bend also has strong support for the East Dome at the George. The club is contractually obligated to staff that East Dome any Saturday night the George is open. As such, FBAC will staff that dome with 3 to 4 people, 48 to 50 times a year. So again, we have to follow the HMNS regulations. Flipping gears, Johnson Space Center Astronomical is a much smaller group, and this will lead into, again, a discussion of club demographics. We are back to meeting at the Lunar Planetary Institute at 3600 Bay Area. We are maintaining hybrid meetings, or we do have a YouTube channel that we maintain, and we have star parties and outreach at the Hack Winery, Lunar Planetary Institute, other areas in the Clear Lake area, as well as going to Fort McCavitt way out in West Texas. And we've got people participating at TSP, El Dorado Star Party, and Okie-Tex. We do have an astro imaging special interest group that is developed because we've got a few people working on the Raspberry Pi and I just dropped the name of it. Where you can actually set up your telescope to automatically plate solving and work the telescope so you can rest in the comfort of your home, and your scope does all the work for you. So wrapping this up a little bit brings common issues to outreach. So participation, how to include and engage people. And just because they have a scope, you can't badger them. People want to have to participate in outreach. Granted, astronomers are largely a group of introverts. So being out in public, okay, they just have to figure it out for themselves if they want to do it. Loaner scopes, I'm glad that Joe brought this up. Some clubs have ties to do this. If they borrow a scope, you ask them kindly if they, as a part of a requirement, they have to bring the scope and them to an outreach event. The only problem with that is it depends how people's loaner scopes are actually going. FBAC is trying to winnow its loaner scope program down to just a handful of dobs and get rid of all the high-end stuff. It's just too much overhead, maintenance, storage, things like that. I don't know what HAS is doing with its loaner scope program. JSCS is non-existent. The loaner scopes that we had for JSCS were destroyed in Tropical Storm Harvey, and there's probably no chance those are going to get replaced. Club demographics, like it or not, members are going to age out. And this will affect a club's ability to do outreach with time. Clubs need an influx of young folk. College, high school, welcome, but more so the young adults that might have bought a scope that may be collecting dust in the closet. That's the kind of person you need to try to reach, as well as kids. But that's the kind of person to try to start bringing young people into the club. Geography is also tied to club demographics. Your ability to man and staff an event will be directly tied to your relative geography. I'll bring up JSCAS. 15 years ago, we could get 10 people across the bridge at Moody Gardens with 3 days notice on a Friday night, by the way. That ship has long since sailed. We went through a downtime where people were leaving, moving on, dare I say, and basically they stopped doing outreach. For a couple of years, it was just Connie, myself, and Jim Wessel, and not necessarily all 3 of us in the same location, but there were a number of events where it was just Connie and I manning them. Now, comically, it was a fun time. The NBA All-Star game was at the Toyota Center, and Connie and I ended up down at Space Center Houston. Well, it turns out for all the retired basketball players and whatever, they had a field day down at Space Center Houston. So it was incredible to have Dobbs sitting there and have these huge people over 6'5" bend over nearly at a 90-degree angle to look into your scope and to talk to them about the moon. And that was really, really kind of fun. But as I said, there are things, once the program started to build back up, geography still became an issue because at one time, JSCAS's geography was tied to about a 2-mile radius of the Lunar Planetary Institute. Right now, I would say way down south, right before you get to Tiki Island, up to about Pasadena, and it would be a stretch to go any further west than between 35 and 288 right now. So right now, we really looked at keeping events within about a 4-mile radius of the LPI. Other clubs have geography. Again, these two, club demographics and geography, are going to be tied to each other. Questions from the public. This is always an entertaining thing. You want to be able to engage the public. You want, as Joe and Emilio said, you don't want to insult them either. You want to help educate them, wow them with detail, wow them with a couple of quick facts while they look at the moon or look at a planet. But you don't want to bluff them either, because they could turn around and look up on Google and call you out on it. So you don't want to bluff them. You've got to be tactful and polite. I found that kids, late elementary, junior high, absolutely love black holes, event horizons, and things that explode in space. So you need to be kind of up on supernovas and things like that. We need to talk about one of the planets. I would encourage you to use the term Uranus rather use Uranus rather than Uranus, particularly in the middle schools. I have personal experience at my son's middle school. A charming little girl came up to me and said, "What color is Uranus?" And she walked off while she was trying to get a response. So you want to make sure you're tactfully educating them at the same time. Also, that goes hand in hand with the general public of trying to steer them away from the holiday scopes of the big box stores. Connie and I have chatted with people at both Sam's and Costco, trying to get them to not buy a scope based on its magnification. So also training the public, if you will, how to look through a scope. This was partially brought up by Debbie as far as little kids and so forth. Also, how do you explain to somebody what averted vision is if they don't know what averted vision is? And that depends on the type of object you're looking at. How to get Looky-Loo members to consider doing visual observing and potentially end up picking up a scope themselves. A number of new members, particularly in JSCAS, are computer-based astronomers. And the minute we start talking about scope collimation, CCD, cameras, EAA, they start tuning out. It's how to cultivate that interest into visual observing and then potentially pulling them into the observing ranks. And then you have to prevent volunteer burnout. Every volunteer need not staff every event. You can get, although I fully agree with Joe and Debbie and Amelia, outreach has been exhilarating and exciting all the years that I've been doing it. But at the same time, it's like you occasionally will have to sit back and say, when was the last time I observed for myself? And you can do that at the outreach events, but sometimes you need to make sure you do it on your own. Okay, other than that, thank you for the time, and I'll pass it back to Debbie.
So thanks. Yeah, we'll have a chance for questions and comments afterwards. We're running along, but I wanted to focus on my own talk just briefly on the joy of doing in-depth outreach. So we often don't have enough members who can do daytime talks. We get occasional requests from schools and I've been speaking to some senior centers, and but what it does is it allows you to really talk in depth about astronomy. And to give you an example, one of my proudest moments was I spoke to some 5th grade Girl Scouts, this is years ago, when we still had a dark sky, about astronomy. And my favorite topic to talk to people before looking through telescopes is the life cycle of a star, because just about everything you see is some point in that life cycle. Baby stars, children's stars, the planetary system is a star in its midlife. And then old age stars and stars dying stars. So if I can give them that talk before they come to the telescope, they have so much more insight in what they're looking at. And my proudest moment, this was way back during Comet Halley when people, before there was ever was a George Observatory, but there were some clubs setting up scopes, and we took the Girl Scouts after my talk to Brazos Bend State Park. And I showed them some things from my telescope. We looked at Comet Halley. And then someone from JSCAS, Johnson Space Center, I was pretty sure, walked up to me and he told me, you know, some girls came and looked through my telescope, and boy, did they know their stuff. So that's what you can do with an in-depth talk. And I do get a little frustrated sometimes with, as Joe and Amelia and Steve said, and everybody else has found it, even just a single look through a telescope is revealing. But being able to give people an in-depth understanding is wonderful. That happens when you help people with the Boy Scout badge. That's an amazing program, gives them a real foundation in astronomy. I haven't done the Girl Scout badge, but I can tell you if it's not as good as the Boy Scout badge, that's one of the reasons we have Girl Scouts joining Boy Scouts. The Boy Scout badge is excellent. With the Girl Scouts that I worked with Joe Califf, this is the other side of it. If we have a small enough group, I like to do a little bit more hands-on with the telescope. When we walked in there and I gave a talk, I could tell this was not their idea, this was their leader's idea. It was in a low-income neighborhood of Northeast Houston. But when we got out into the sky, we were fortunate to have a really good night for Saturn. And we had just a few kids. So I was able to let them not only look at Saturn, but focus it, handle my telescope, aim at Saturn themselves. And I could just see them light up when I had the time to do that. And I got the letter from the scout leader, and she said, you've been voted the #1 best thing they did at summer camp, even better than the square dancing. So, and then I'll have there's this one anecdote which is near and dear to my heart, and that's little Sadie. This is at the George Observatory. There's this 3.5-year-old little girl with these cascading blonde curls down her back. And when she came up to the steps to look in the 13-inch Dobsonian, she had to climb about 3 steps. She was scared to death. I've never seen a kid actually cry, like full out bawling, that she was afraid to go up the steps. So we worked with her for a while. Her father was just about to give up. And I finally said, we've got to get her up there. This is Saturn, and it's a really great view tonight. She finally went up there. When she got up there, she became very quiet, and she took one of the longest looks I've ever seen a little girl take. And then the line proceeded. We finally had to get her, coax her down so other people could look. And then when the line proceeded, every fourth person was Sadie again. So this is what a view of Saturn or the stars can do for little kids. And now she must be 19 years old or so. I keep wondering whatever happened to little Sadie. And one last one, I spoke to some kids, and this topic was about the stories of the constellations. And I spent like 7 minutes telling the whole story of Andromeda, Cassiopeia, Cepheus, the king and queen of Ethiopia, and tying Andromeda to the rock, and Perseus coming in with the flying horse, Pegasus, and swooping down and saving her, and carrying Medusa and turning everybody to stone. And then I had a hand go up, and this little kid who looked like he was out of a Norman Rockwell painting said, he raised his hand, he said, is this all fake? And it's just the funniest thing I've ever heard, but it was hysterical. He was completely serious about that we must be pulling the wool over their eyes. So I explained to him, yes, this is ancient mythology. So those are my stories. I'm going to pass this on to Dan Roy, our grand finale. I know this is running long, but he's going to be delightful, and he's our current outreach chair.
Grand finale, my foot, it's going to be hard to top that. Okay, let me see. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, I trust you guys can hear me. No?
Yeah, yes, we can. Sorry.
Okay, good. All right. I want to let you know, I think that's something that David forgot. I'm a member of a GSCIS, and I have a logo here, and I organize with my wife every first Saturday of the month astronomy in the park. Like you, Bruce, we have an agreement with the city park services. We are joined, we are volunteers, but we are badge volunteers, all sorts of background checks on us, And we organize this every first Saturday of the month. And this is the program for 2023. So you can see that on the screen. And if you're interested, kindly send me email danroy@scpp.com here, and I will send you a copy of that. I will also send that to the mailing list. Now, one thing that we never do is cancel, even if it rains cats and dogs, because we have literature, we have laptops, all sorts of stuff. In particular, we have Moon Atlas and Stellarium, which is not exactly clear on my little IBM laptop, but those things are important to me because I think it's good to have people spend 10 seconds at the IPs, but we should give them something they can remember the event by. And having free software, having a list of URLs, having some literature is extremely important for them to maybe pursue their passion with astronomy. And we also show some pictures of the Hubble Space Telescope and some DVDs. Anyway, that we never cancel, and in particular, if it rains real hard, I have a 3x5 poster of the moon, and the other side is Mars in the back of my van. And then my wife has a little 100mm on slow-mo in the shelter, and the kids can manipulate the controls and have a look at the poster, but unfortunately, they prefer to rush to the van and be seen by their little friends in the telescope on Mars, So anyway, kids. Something that unfortunately we cannot always do is a solar system model. We have a solar system model, basically a little bit of a little tent made in wood that has a picture of a planet. And then I look at two planets today website, and I plot the position of the planets on the ecliptic that night, and then with the help of willing parents, or sometimes kids or both, we install the planets on the solar system ecliptic with a big ball of shiny metallic thing, Albad, at the center. And unfortunately, the younger kids love to kick that as if it was a ball, So sometimes it's difficult to pursue this kind of experiment. But we have the little tents that are connected to the sun by a string, and the string length is, of course, to scale, proportional to the average distance from the planet to the sun. And I made a couple of these for local schools. And I have a document, if you're interested, that allows you to build and even use this kind of solar system model. It's very easy to do. And I think it could be a very good little science project for schools. Now, to me, the ultimate outreach is this. I'm volunteering for the Foundation for International Space Education because I fell in love with the United States because of the space program. And I want to share that not only with my American brothers and sisters, but with anybody who is interested in space anywhere. And basically, the Foundation for International Space Education has a program called United Space School that brings 50 of the most brilliant kids in the world from 17 different countries to Houston to learn about the space program, see what we are doing at Johnson in particular. We have lectures by professional aerospace engineers and by astronauts. And they visit the center. They have, in particular, a major assignment, and it's to design a mission to Mars. They work in teams, and those teams are looking at, for instance, the propulsion and the planetary trajectory. They are looking at the habitats on Mars and the rover and that kind of stuff. It's an absolutely fantastic program, and I want to put a plug for it here. If you are interested, please send me email. What is going on here is that you host 2 of those kids in your home, and you drive them to the University of Houston at Clear Lake and to the Johnson Space Center every day for 2 weeks. it's not a big load, but of course, if you're living in Humboldt, that's pretty much an impossibility. But if you are closer to Galveston, closer to Johnson Space Center, I would urge you to try that. It's a magnificent program. Those kids are so bright, you would not believe the kind of conversation you can have with them. And of course, they come from different cultural backgrounds. So it's a wonderful thing to do. And, the United Nations should have a look at what's going on when those kids are dancing together and flirting together and shouting together. It's a it's so heartwarming to see that. Okay. All right. And this is in particular one star party that I organize at my place for FISC, the Foundation for International Space Education. Have a look at the expression on this young woman's face when she is listening to Amelia telling her about Astrea. I mean, this is why we do this, is this not? It is to inspire the next generation. And those kids are so bright. It doesn't take much to inspire them. And who knows? You are looking at probably the first people on Mars. You are looking at the first aerospace engineer who will be involved with getting us to Titan and that kind of stuff. It's very exciting. At the other end of the scale, we have absolutely beautiful pictures that are dear to my heart. Those three sisters here, using my armchair that I built out of a recovered swivel chair from my son, who is going through them very quickly because he is an avid player of video games. And so I basically put together this seed that allows me to look with my binoculars in comfort. But the kids did not have the reach to use that. But exactly as Joe mentioned, we have a lot of artwork and we need a bigger fringe. So some advice. Plan as you would a typical night IVIPs, okay? It must be planned. In particular, have an equipment checklist. There is nothing more embarrassing than bringing all those equipment and very heavy telescope and oops, I forgot the little box with all the eyepiece. That can be pretty annoying. Check the weather, and I'm guilty of that. I look at the weather recently for a star party in Central Houston. It was for the Central Library in Houston. The weather looked good. For Lake City, when I got to the library, it was raining cats and dogs, and the telescopes were drowned, and I lost all my posters of the moon and Mars. It was a total disaster. So please double check, including the visible objects, like any planetarium, and the location and the direction, and it can help to have a point of contact phone number in your cell phone, just in case. Okay, say, oops, I'm sorry, I'm in a traffic jam, I'll be late, Spread the word. I showed you to start my talk, I showed you the brochure that I put together for astronomy in the park. And it's a good way to advertise your event, because if nobody knows about it, it's not going to be very useful. And it helps to have astronomers know that, because they can certainly be very instrumental in making it an even more memorable event, and to the potential audience as well. So, for instance, in Nick City, we have an area where we collect the mail. I put that stuff with the mailboxes, and that way I get a couple of customers. Now, be patient. Okay, once at Astronomy in the Park, I had a woman I did not know very well from GSCAS, and she came with this telescope mount, this binocular mount, and a kid could not handle it and say, I don't see anything. You've heard that before. And she said, well, if you don't see anything, get glasses. And then the mother tried to intervene, but she chewed up the mother. So I had a kid in tears and a very irate mother on my hand. Who needs that? Now, be indulgent with naive questions. One of the favorites is, how far can you see? And how can you see the galaxy if you're inside it? So we have naive questions, but let's also remember that we only know 5% in astronomy is what's going on out there, okay? 68% is dark energy. Nobody has a clue, okay? And 27% is the dark matter, and only 5% is what we can really see. So let's be a little bit more open with those naive questions and be appreciative of the help, you know? I once had some interesting exchange with a group of who was basically a couple of anti-French racists. they get on my case. They insulted me even in public on the mailing list, and I even received a very insulting and violent email from one of the racists because I had brought to a star party at a school a couple of Mexican teachers. And of course, they addressed the basically mostly an Hispanic audience in Spanish. And so I got insulted because of that. And needless to say, I have nothing to do, whatever, with those people anymore. Okay? Who needs that? So anyway, give yourself plenty of time to set up and even more to pack up, because at night it's pretty difficult to find the place to put the stuff. And if you need my document, the document I mentioned about how to build a solar system, then please, by all means, send me an email at danroy@stpp.com. That's all I had.
Thanks so much, Dan. And any minute we're going to open up for comments, but we also have one more person, Bram Wiseman, who is also a past outreach chair, and he's going to mention one of my favorite types of outreach, which is Halloween. Bram?
Hello, everybody. It's been a fun evening. I wanted to tell you about one of my favorite neighborhood outreach nights, which is Halloween. I guarantee you, you're going to be the most memorable house on the block, and you can show just about anything. The first year that I did this, it was in the 90s, and there was a comet in the sky that was very unique for a comet because it was basically coming right at us, so it didn't have an apparent tail. I can't remember the name of it. But the kids were so fascinated and frankly shocked by the experience that they would walk off in a daze forgetting all about candy. Now, this year I brought out my telescope and I showed the moon and Jupiter and Saturn, and it was so much fun. I had several families come back for a second run with additional relatives. They brought their grandma, and I had to break out Google Translate to translate Venezuelan. And there was another family that was just fantastic. And I have to tell you, when these people walked up my driveway, I was a little bit intimidated. Dad was a scary looking character, but their kid was so into astronomy, and he already knew he wanted to be an astronaut. And when I heard just the knowledge coming out of his mouth, like he knew a lot about the planets already, and he was maybe 10 or 11 years old. I told his parents, I said, you guys are doing the right thing. Keep doing what you're doing. So it was super fun. The last thing I'd like to say is a plug for my favorite outreach telescope. Now, I know that a lot of people like to demonstrate push to and stay away from electronics, but I have a telescope that can save the day, especially when you're in a rush to set up, you've got limited time, and then the clouds roll in. So this telescope is an Orion XX12G, and a lot of these Orion and Stargate telescopes, if they have the SynScan system, here's what's cool about them. You can set them up in daylight. You set the GPS coordinates, the date and the time. You set them level north before you turn them on. That's the first step. Level north, turn it on, set the coordinates and the time. Actually, the coordinates alone is going to allow you to turn on sidereal tracking and have decent tracking. If you set pretty accurate date and time and you're pretty good with your level north, you might even get a decent go-to out of it. But the beauty of it is you can put it on an object when you've got sucker holes and it'll track that object while you're waiting for the clouds to go away, and it's probably still there when the clouds are opened up again. So just some tips from my experience, and I hope to see you all out there doing some outreach.
Thanks, Bram. And one last thing I was going to mention, light pollution. We have developed a 1-minute lamp demonstration. Here it is. It's 5 colors, 7 brightnesses. You can do any angle. And I have how you do that on our website, www.softlighthouston.com. I can put that in the chat. That's at the bottom of the education page. And then on the gallery, both pages, on that same page, see our 20-second, it's actually Jim King's and Stephen Amelia Goldberg's 20-second disappearing pedestrian video, which was actually filmed after an outreach. And I'm hoping the police will use it someday, but Amelia just walks from left to right, and you can see her. She gets in front of a bright white light, you can't see her, and then she gets to the shielded lighting again, you see her again. So in 20 seconds, she can teach people about light pollution, or with the lamp, it takes about 60 seconds. And that's all we have as far as presentation. I was afraid we wouldn't have enough to say, not a problem. Joe, are you able to unmute everybody if anyone has any comments? I see we have Buster Wilson. I think I remember him having Buster, if you're the one I remember talking about the paper plate idea, I'd love to hear it again. And if not, I'll mention it later on.
Debbie, I have a comment. About 6 months ago, you spoke about the solar eclipse, and I tried to make a reservation in a hotel in San Antonio and Austin. They are booked solid for April 7th to April 9th. Finally, I got one room in an Airbnb in Waco, Texas. Everything is sold out. You were right.
Yeah, right. So I've noticed that the price gouging has started. I have a friend up in the Northeast who wanted me to start looking. She's dealing with her significant other serious illness, and wanted me to help her. And the price gouging where I did the Airbnb is way up. What I would recommend is if the price gouging gets too bad, this path is so wide that even halfway to the edge it's still about 3 minutes. I mean, you can go along. It may be that the center line will be more expensive. I'm not sure, but start looking farther out from the center line for housing if it gets too expensive. But the same kind of house I got, and I hope they don't dump me. I made sure they knew about the eclipse and that they were taken care of. The same kind of house I got is now, there are people advertising similar houses, but for the 3 nights, it'd be $14,000. It's ridiculous. I think the people doing that much price gouging won't find people to stay with them. So
I want to say hello
to do it ahead of time. And then the price gouging starts. And if you do Airbnb or VRBO.com, make sure it creates a lot of goodwill to tell them how wonderful the eclipse is. It's very important that their own family has an opportunity to see it and has the housing to do it. And then ask if you can rent their house. And I offer to send them information. That's worked the 3 times I've done it. It's created a lot of goodwill.
Just want to say hello to Dan Roy. I've been to his rustic park and enjoy his show. Hello, Dan. Can't hear him. He's muted.
I think he's muted.
Here we go. Hello, brother. Good to see you again.
All right, we did have a question, Renee. So sorry, Debbie. I was reading the list, the questions on the list. Renee had posted something. John Benner had mentioned or asked a question. Do you ever use EAA for outreaches? It might make it easier, especially for smaller kids, than trying to look through an eyepiece. Also, with filters, more objects would be visible in light polluted skies. And so, I believe we did talk about, and David, you did talk about EAA quite a bit there. But I was curious to see if anybody had any comments about filters and their use in outreach.
I remember, I think we had someone mention recently that they're starting to do that just on their portable telescopes out in the field, and they're starting to use EAA. So kind of a shame we need it, but if it's the best way to show deep sky, and for small children, I agree. But yeah, it's available. I haven't tried it yet, but it's definitely becoming an option for outreach.
We did a star party at Blossom Hotel in the Medical Center, and somebody up there had an EAA system set up, and he was doing it there.
Yeah, so for those who don't know about EAA, I learned about it from our talks here at the Astronomy Club. It's a system that sort of instantly stacks a few images to make an instant image that the public can see within a few minutes of the telescope collecting that light. And it's much more than you can see with your eyes.
We had an event with JSCAS where somebody actually set up EAA and was doing it on the moon and then shifted over to a deep sky object. And we didn't know that a person was going to show up in a full-blown wheelchair, and most of the telescopes, except for his setup, were in the grass. It ended up being a save the day situation. And this person was able to look at what was on the screen. He was able to change and move things around, do a quick stack. It actually ended up being a game changer.
So I like the idea of it's being supplementary. I still think there's nothing like seeing something with your own eyes. So I'd hate to see us abandon seeing things with your own eyes through a telescope.
I agree.
Okay. I'd like to mention another great Halloween object. One that's always a favorite is the owl cluster or the ET cluster. But even better than that, for Halloween, there's what a lot of people know as the sailboat asterism, which honestly, when I look at that, I don't see a sailboat. But kudos to our friend Will Young, who's the president of, what is it? He's over on the east side. Anyway.
Yeah.
That asset, thank you. Yeah. Will's interpretation of this cluster is the Halloween cat, and it's perfect. It's an arching cat, and at Halloween time, it's exactly the right orientation. The cat's upright, the back's arched, the tail's there. It's fabulous. Don't forget that one.
Awesome. And then John V asked, will contact information for the speakers be posted later? I may have missed some. John, yeah, we'll go ahead and distribute that to everybody on the Astro list, if that's okay with the folks who are on here as panelists. I'll confirm with everybody afterwards, and we'll share everybody's contact information. So if you have any questions for me, you can always just send me an email directly, joe.k@astronomyhouston.org, and I can get you in touch with anybody that you need to. All right, do we have any other questions before we wrap up for tonight? If you do, please feel free to come off of mute and ask your question to the panel. Okay, not hearing anything. Well, to all the panelists here tonight, thank you very much for a wonderful presentation. We've all been intimately involved in outreach for a number of years. I think, Debbie, you said that most of the folks on the call tonight have the Texas Star Party Omega Centauri Awards. Many people have won those, which is...
That wasn't my idea to mention that. Somebody else came up with that.
Oh, did they? Okay.
I hadn't noticed, actually.
Yeah, which again is something that with a lot of these outreach efforts and whatnot, you might have the opportunity to win as well. So, Debbie, before we leave, I just wanted to thank you for the number of years of service you have done for the club in this role as novice chairperson. We really appreciate it. You're leaving lots of big shoes to fill for the next person to come along. So we've certainly learned a lot through your novice presentations and the folks that you've brought to speak to us. So thank you very much for everything that you've done as novice chairperson. And we know that you're going to continue to stay plugged in with the club. So we're looking forward to what that next chapter is. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you. It's the ultimate outreach job. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And Joe, about tomorrow night's meeting?
Yes. I don't know if you all can see the screen right now, but tomorrow's meeting is at 7 p.m. If you haven't registered yet, please go to astronomyhouston.org, and we've got the registration link there. It is our typical December kind of fun event where we're going to have some trivia. We're going to talk about the Texas Star Party. Steve, I believe you've got a presentation there tomorrow as well to discuss TSP. We had a wonderful TSP this year, so you'll get to learn a bit about that and more information about the Texas Star Party. And just more fun and fellowship. So hopefully you all have the time to come join us. We'd love to have you on with us. I think in the trivia, we're going to be giving away some prizes. So be sure to participate. And if you've ever done any of Don Selly's trivia questions or participated in those, you'll know those are really tough. So I always hear about it afterwards, how angry and upset people are because of the difficulty of the questions. But That to me is a sign of a good trivia event. So please join us if you can. Like I said, the links are there on the website, astronomyhouston.org. And I'll go ahead and send a reminder out tomorrow with the links as well so you can join. And as always, if you're on social media, any of these sites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, please feel free to give us a follow. And lastly, as I've mentioned, if you have any questions, you can always send those to us. The best way is info@astronomyhouston.org. But if you send me an email, joek@astronomyhouston.org, I will respond to you directly as well. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. Again, panelists, thank you for sharing all of your information and knowledge about outreach. And we hope to see you all tomorrow and at a future outreach event. Thank you very much.